again, being in the studio with Beyonce, being in the studio with Jay-Z and Mac Miller, and working with D'Angelo, literally being the only musician on stage with D'Angelo, on some of his final performances is, I didn't have that on my bingo card.
Real quick, if you're new here, welcome to the TrevBeats Show. Hit subscribe so we can keep building together. And to my regulars who show up every time, I see you, and your viewership means everything. If you ever want to help fuel this channel so we can do even bigger things, you can grab some fresh gear from the merch store below or jump into the backstage membership next to the subscribe button. Now back to the show.
TrevBeats Show, TrevBeats Show. TrevBeats Show, TrevBeats Show.
What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the TrevBeats Show. Today we have a master trumpeter, a platinum producer, a composer, and a true sonic visionary all in one. Now, Wynton Marsalis called him the future of the trumpet, but his footprint goes way beyond just jazz. He played incredible, breathtaking work on that Don Cheadle, Miles Davis biopic, Miles Ahead, and he produced with legends like Jay-Z, Nas, Beyoncé, Maxwell, Mac Miller, so many different people, and he's currently touring behind his incredible Grammy-nominated album Foreverland on Concord Jazz. And he just brought down the house at Carnegie Hall, celebrating the Miles Davis Centennial. Put some respect on his name. St. Louis own, the one and only Keyon Harrold is here. My brother.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
What is going on, sir?
What up, my brother? How are you?
I'm good,
it's a pleasure.
Man.
Pleasure to be here and talk to you, man.
Yeah, man. Thank you so much for coming, man. It's like, I say this to all my guests, like everybody's busy, but it's the truth because everybody that comes on here is legendary, man. So you are no different. Thank you so much for coming, bro. It's been like, amazing to see you do what you've been doing over these last, several years, man, and even privileged more to work with you at times. So, thanks for coming on the TrevBeats Show, man.
My pleasure.
So, man, I gotta say, I just recently went to St. Louis, man, and man, I went to this one area. It looked like Century City or Beverly Hills over there, man. It was crazy. You know what I'm saying?
You. Sound like you was in probably Ladue or something like that. Where were you?
It was like I know it was like a whole bunch of shops, and there was some famous breakfast place everybody goes to, and it was like a lot of buildings with like white brick and stuff, and like a lot of developments like condos. Okay. And it was so crazy, man. I was like, yo, this is amazing, man, because I hadn't been in quite a while. But you're born and raised in St. Louis, yes?
Yes, sir. More specifically, Ferguson.
Okay.
But St. Louis is St. Louis. The whole vibe.
Right. And Ferguson, come on, man. Ferguson got put on the map. You know what I'm saying? Like, wow, that's crazy, man. And that also makes a lot of sense, when you see how you move and how conscious and how Afrocentric you are in your music and in your personality. That doesn't surprise me, that lineage. You know what I'm saying?
Yes, sir.
So, okay, let's just get into it right now. Now, you are one of the few people that is a real legitimate jazz trumpet player on every metric, but you completely dip and dabble into the other side. You know what I'm saying? With hip hop and all that. So not just as a trumpeter, you're definitely a multiple crazy amount of record selling producer. And when you're not at the trumpet, but you're approaching a track, whether it's even your own stuff, because that has elements and stuff in it too, or when you're doing something like with Nas or anybody on the other side, how do you decide when the trumpet needs to even be part of it? You know what I'm saying? And when it needs to be like, because you could always just say, oh, I'm going to play trumpet on everything, but you don't do that. You know what I'm saying? So
nah.
What's that thing that says, maybe the trumpet's not the dominant thing on this particular thing?
You know what? It comes down to knowing, the history and the lineage of what the music calls for. Sometimes people just overdo it, and sometimes it gets real cliche. But, knowing, when when it's time, that's one of the biggest prerequisites that one needs to be known as a great artist. You have to be able to create a certain level of dopeness. Some people just don't know. They don't have those inklings. So it's like you got to be able to trust the moment. Sometimes the moment calls for a blaring trumpet solo. Sometimes it doesn't call for anything. Sometimes it calls for just the beat or not the beat, or it's just the chords. So you got to be able to know that again, the idea of production is about creation and curation, as to choosing the right scenarios, the right people, the right vibe, to make something come about. So again, sometimes as a voice, it's important that I'm present. Sometimes as a voice, it's important that I know that I shouldn't be there right now. Right. Again, I've been blessed to be able to work on so many different things. And, one of the biggest things that I take away is if I have a voice, it can travel no matter what kind of beat it is, no matter what kind of scenario it is. If I've cultivated a voice enough, it will travel. It doesn't matter. The only thing that's going to really change the genre or the kind of music that I'm playing is just the beat. How many different chords do we actually have? Right. It's only a few. Right. But how again? So it's like only thing that's really going to change that is the beat. So whether I'm working with Maxwell or Jay-Z or Beyonce or Raphael Sadiq or whoever, my sound and my vision and my intellect is gonna take it where it needs to be.
Yeah. And that's I've seen you at work in the different areas, man. And it's like, that is true. Like the whole taste thing. And it's a big testament to taking the ego out of the music, because you're trying to serve the song, which is something we hear a lot and we talk about a lot. But it's like you're really doing that. And at the end of the day, man, it sounds that way. I mean, even on your project, like Foreverland, is very intentional with the, space and, and then on the other side with the emotional weight of it, you know what I'm saying? It gets very emotional at times. Now, I understand, correct me if I'm wrong, that you spent some time working on that in Vegas during the lockdown. Is that true?
Yeah. During the lockdown, man, it was a crazy time in life for me, in terms of relationships, in terms of what was going on socially, in terms of what was going on in our world, particularly. At that time, we weren't getting a chance to really vibe out with our musician community. Everybody was by themselves. It was during the pandemic. I was stuck in Brooklyn and Queens the whole time for like 2 years. Wishing I had the opportunity, to play with my brothers and sisters. But at that time, my brother and sisterin at the time, that's actually sounded crazy. I'm gonna re-say that. And at that time, as a musician, we were longing to perform and to be in our regular community of musicianship. It's hard to do it in a silo, as much as we can create, but at some point we just want to play. We just want to be, amongst each other. So at that time, it was like my birthday, and I'm like, okay, I want to get some musicians together. I just want to hang. I didn't even plan on it being a recording or one that would be something. I just wanted to get together. So I got together, with a few cats, and we just went to Vegas and hung out for a few days. And it turned it turned into the makings of my album Foreverland.
Yeah, that's beautiful, man. And that's great story. And I feel you. It was a weird time, man. Creatively, you couldn't get out and do your thing, and it just had a lot of people questioning things, and it was tough. So it's amazing that we're now left with this body of music, that was celebrated, that really will now always be a time capsule for that time period, emotionally speaking. So you've talked about how the ingredients of a good record are like a great meal, right? And you don't just need any kind of pepper, you need a specific kind, right? So when you do tracks like Find Your Peace with Robert Glasper and Common, or Beautiful Day with PJ Morton, how did you know those specific personalities were going to be just the perfect ingredients needed to complete your vision creatively?
Man, fortunately, I got really, really dope friends, and they know they can make anything sound good. Number one.
Yeah.
Number two is, it was a vibe. It was an energy. Anytime I'm writing something, I'm for the most part thinking about who I believe will take my vision further than what it already is.
Yeah.
Again, in the terms of PJ Morton and our song Beautiful Day, it was a matter of going to New Orleans, sitting with him, telling him, what was going on in my world and in my mind, and him sitting down at the piano and, us coming up with an idea and a vibe that would really be the summation of, no matter what you're going through, the worst of times or the best of times, is still going to be a beautiful day. The sun's still going to shine no matter what. If we trust that we can get through it together. So, that sentiment was something that was captured immediately. So PJ Morton is a king at that. So, again, that worked well. The idea of Find Your Peace, it started off as a track called Song Number 2. And immediately doing it, I considered, who would be amazing on this? Whose feel would be impeccable for this? Who knows how to make these voices sing? Who knows how to play in a style that's so free that, one must be able to travel out of your mental state. And that's Robert Glasper, the one and only. Yeah. So, again, from Chris Dave to Bernice Travis, to Justice West, Shedrick Mitchell, all these incredible, minds all in one place. It got to be something special. And again, and Common and Laura Mvula, so many amazing people, Greg Fillinganes. I'm talking about, again, on my, my journey in life, I've been blessed to really meet and work with some incredible people. And those kind of collaborations really make for a proper meal.
Yeah, man. Well, it definitely sounds like that. And those energies, it's like you assembled the super friends, man. So, it's like a beautiful job on that. Now, on another project, the evolution of bop, pop, hip hop, jazz for your quintet, that sound has been described like a blend of bop, pop, hip hop, and jazz. But, there's a lot of today now we've seen the evolution of genre bending, right? When we first started coming up, you had the Young Lion movement over here that was all jazz. You had hip hop over here. And now 25, 30 years later is completely like this, right? Mm-hmm. So, it feels like that's been a natural language for you, already. Like, Mm-hmm. So how do you keep the, I guess when we're talking about traditional jazz, how do you keep the unpredictable edge of it? You know what I mean? While you're still locked in and it's not off-putting to the listener. It's not over the listener's head. Like, how do you get it to translate so well?
I mean, first off, Miles Davis is a heavy influence. And, I think the idea is speaking to the people versus yelling at the people, speaking to the people musically and not beating them over the head. It's about finding a language, finding, a certain style that really can permeate through the different genres. It's like, again, it's like speaking softly so people actually listen to you. Again, as a trumpet player, again, I love the idea of being able to dice it up, or at the same time play 2 or 3 notes, and being able to know what kind of situation I'm in, and again, being able to forecast, okay, you're doing too much, or to be able to forecast, I need to do more, or be able to say, okay, let's talk to these people's heart with these ballads, or with these long notes, with these footballs. When is the time? It's all. My dad used to always tell me it's a time and season to every purpose, and sometimes it's a time for us to burn out and go hard and play high and play loud and play the most craziness, and make organized chaos. But sometimes it's time to play beauty, and talk to people's soul and massage people's hearts. Again, I think my favorite musicians have the ability to know when is the time, and again, I hear a lot of different kinds of music. I hear sometimes where people know exactly what to do, but then I hear people doing way too much and basically just shoving it down people's throat, which is not the vibe. Again.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you said burnout, man. You just instantly took me back to the 90s, man.
Oh, yeah.
Come on now. Playing fast, Now, speaking of Miles, I mean, dude, first of all, congratulations. You just did Carnegie Hall, man.
Carnegie Hall. Come on, man. Woo. You know what it is as a child, as a musician, as an instrumentalist, the dream is to be on that stage, man.
Yeah. Carnegie Hall, man. Wow, bro. That's amazing. Now during that time you spoke, really beautifully about being mentored across time, by studying Miles, and his concepts and even his fashion, So, and that's a thing, man. That is a thing. That's part of that expression. And we all, I just watched the clip the other day, that famous clip when Marcus, was asking him questions and he started being like, man, don't ask me too many questions. And he said, well, what were you wearing? He said, green Aberdeen. You know what I'm saying? So what's the biggest lesson you took from Miles, regarding how a band leader, should push the boundaries and also manage, the energy on stage?
Mm-hmm. I think the biggest lesson, for lack of better words, is Miles knew how to trust certain people. He knew how to, find, cast the net, find those great ones and allow them to be who they are, to make a whole, to let those, micros become a macros, from Herbie to Ron Carter to Tony Williams, to Joe Zawinul to Wayne Shorter, allowing them all to be themselves in that group and to allow them to go out and for them all to really influence who we are, who you are, and who all of our favorite musicians have become because of Miles allowing, a platform for them to basically do their thing. I mean, I always, take from the idea of me being a band director and trusting that if I call either Shedrick Mitchell, I'll say Nir Felder or Bernice Travis or anybody, allow them to have their input and see how it goes. I take that from that story of Miles about Wayne, Wayne with his little book, always showing up with that little book because you never know what was in there, from ESP to Footprints to all of those incredible songs. He allowed people around him to be vehicles as well. As he was pushing the whole thing, they was holding it up, man. So again, how do you lead if you how are you leading if you're not allowing the people to follow in the correct way,
And I think, staying on Miles for a second, it's like we all hear and talk about some of these things in his concepts, and it may even be second or third generation through people he's told it to. So it's like when I go back in my mind, you named a lot of people with Miles and Wayne and all these other people, and I mean Herbie and Wayne and all these other people. And I know working with Herbie, one of the things was play your mistakes, but he got that from Miles. So it's like Miles just put so much energy and concept into the sphere of jazz music and just music in general. A lot of us have, different parts of Miles and things, and we don't even know. Some people don't even know that's where these concepts came from. So that being said, you had the opportunity to go in and play the Miles parts on an incredible movie by Don Cheadle a few years back, and called Miles Ahead. Now, were you? How was that psychologically, man? Because this is now, when you're heroes and you get tapped to be the one that brings that to modern times again. What was that like? What was that whole experience like, man?
Oh man, that was an incredible experience. Shout out to Don Cheadle and Robert Glasper for making that happen. It was a scenario I basically got a chance to speak like my proverbial musical father. You know, it's like, you know, when we're at home, your parents teach you, you know, for the most part, your parents teach you. And then over time, you know, you might mimic them sometimes, you know, but then there's a scenario where, you know, maybe your parents are gone and it's time for you to basically pray. You know, and most of the time you're going to sound just like them because you've been listening to that for so long. You've been living that reality for so long. So, you know, that's the way I see it. It was a special undertaking because it wasn't something that I had to list, you know, be like, okay, you know, we're going to do this milestone. We're going to play 60s, 50s. We're going to do 70s. We're going to do the 80s, you know, go home and practice. It wasn't that. I've been listening listening and going with that my entire life from the age of, you know, 14, 15 years old to when my mom first started buying me those records, Conda Blue and, you know, Birth of the Cool. So it was always a part of me. So I had the opportunity to express, you know, outwardly exactly what was inside of me.
Yeah. You know, usually I tell the story from the beginning, but now we're doing it a little out of order, which is actually cool because we kind of see where you are. On the early side, when did you pick up a trumpet? Like, what was that about? Did you come up in a house full of musicians, or how did that work? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I grew up, man, definitely in a house full of music, a house full of all kind of music, you know, from gospel. My parents were in the ministry, so we basically had to be the Levites and show up to church, you know. So I started off really early, you know. At the age of 6, my grandfather had a drum and bugle corps in which we all had to learn how to play. I wanted to be a drummer. That didn't work out because everybody wanted to play drums. So somebody had to play the horn. So, you know, the horn was put in my hand and, you know, I started practicing, started playing, and I started getting good at it. So I couldn't switch to the drums. But my brother, I always tell this story, my brother Emmanuel is now playing with Gregory Porter, been playing with him for years. He started off on horn too, but, you know, he couldn't go back because he didn't progress on the horn. So he was allowed to switch to the drums and the rest is history.
Wow.
So, you know, but again, the idea of the drum and bugle corps, my grandfather would find all kind of music from Count Basie, music from Tito Puente. We was learning all this stuff at a young age, not to mention, you know, one of my first professional tours was actually playing with the Count Basie Orchestra. And I knew some of that music just from my grandfather, which was amazing. Wow. So, you know, a family of music is definitely what it was.
Yeah. Yeah. That's crazy, man. Well, it sounds like you've been playing that long, man, because, you know, it's just otherworldly. I know I first got introduced to you by our mutual friend, Terrence Morton. And, Terrence and I go back so far. So certain things we could say and you know what it is. So he's like, oh, Trev, he one of the ones. Oh, okay. All right, say less. I already know what it is. Like, that's it.
Yes,
like, you know what I'm saying? We don't have to even, okay, I know exactly what you're talking about when you say that. And it's all true, bro. You just been murdering it. And then, and this is the thing that's amazing too, is like, you know, you've done all this stuff, but then you're hopping on, you know, the newer generation of people like the new R&B soul phenomenon, Destin Conrad, and you're on his project, Whimsy. So, you know, that's a big generational, you know, difference. So like what draws you to working with these younger generation artists and creators?
Oh man, what draws me is the same thing that drew me to wanting, you know, to play this music, to play jazz. It's like I'm always looking for the next incredibleness, the next dopeness, the next amazing vision. I always want to be a part of the next vision. I want to give my vision because I want to live in music, in culture, in life. You know, when I see somebody dope, you know, when I hear about somebody dope, I want to know what's up. As simple as that. You know, again, I love dope music. It doesn't matter what genre. I'm not a genre type person. I did used to be like a jazz aficionado kind of. That's what it is. You know, when I
Right.
first moved to New York City, that's all I was thinking about. I wanted to have the next great quintet, just
Right.
like every other trumpet player. You know, watching Roy Hargrove, watching Wynton Marsalis and Nicholas Payton. You know, really, lead amazing bands. I wanted to do that, but my first job was working with Common, so that changed that. And again, from Common to D'Angelo to Erykah Badu to Mary J. Blige and everybody else in between, it was an incredible experience. And each one of those had the ingredient of that was the next. That was the vibe. Who each one of those people was the vibe. I look at Destin, Conrad like that, Tiana Major 9, Sasha Keeble. I mean, there's so many dope people that are out, and I think the idea of these people that we're talking about, the new generation, is not that what their age means, it's what their spirit lends. So, we're always trying to tap in on the spirit. I want to be a part of that dope spirit. So it doesn't matter if that person's 14, 10, or 58. It doesn't even matter. To me, I want to be a part of, creating something special that people can be influenced and can be uplifted by.
Yeah. Well, I mean, yeah, man, that's absolutely amazing. And I know it benefits, they learn a lot from you as well. And that inspiration is serious. But I also don't want to paint this picture like you only exist in these worlds of, jazz and black music, because you've been on stage with people like Keith Richards and Jeff Beck, so let's not get it confused. So when you, I mean, dude, that's a bar. So it's like, when you get in those situations, I mean, how do you find yourself in those situations compared to the other situations? Like, say you get on stage with a Jeff Beck or Keith Richards. As a trumpet player, these are heavy guitar players, man. So do you, in those situations, do you bring, extra effects or what I mean? Or is that just, do you have your effects always as part of your sound? Or how does that mind frame work when you're about to do a gig like that?
Oh, man. As far as, with Jeff Beck, that was an incredible experience at Lincoln Center. No, I was just, playing my trumpet, in the studio with the legend Keith Richards. Again, I was called just to be myself. And that's one of the things as an artist. At some point, it's great to be able to play. It's great to be able to play styles. It's great to be able to show up and read something. But it's another thing to be called just to be yourself. And that's kind of what that was. And that kind of is my career at the moment. At one time, it was about learning how to play music. But now it's about learning how to, now it's about actually doing the music. So again, when I get called in, if I'm bringing effects, that's cool. But if it's just me and my dented up horn, that's another thing. That's cool.
Right.
Yeah.
So, I mean, now, as far as, since we're talking about being you and you're in that phase, you also have this other phase now, which is more of an, advisor and, some of these other things. So now you're wearing the hat of artistic advisor for both the St. Louis and the Intersection Festival in St. Louis. So when you took on that business side, you know what I'm saying, as far as programming festivals and all that kind of stuff, you got to see a lot of new artists and a lot of, new talent. So what did you feel was the biggest missing link in, in the new generation? You know what I'm saying? Like while you were in that process.
Interesting. That's a great question.
Yeah.
Again, the process and the progression of going from just, musician to actually being on the other side of advising and curating is a whole nother thing. And, from your question, it's just like being able to tap the people who most people miss. When I'm curating, I have an opportunity to say, yeah, that person's great. That person's great, but you should check out this person, or we should put that person in front of an audience, or, that person's never played here before. Let's bring this person to St. Louis, like this year, at Music at the Intersection Festival, Maddie, July 17th to 19th, we're going to be bringing in, Moonchild, and Nubia Garcia from the UK. Most of these people, they typically they're going right past St. Louis on their tours. But I'm like, listen, it's imperative that we see this kind of dopeness. Destin Conrad, who's having an incredible year.
Yeah.
And then, you know, more legends like, you know, John Batiste, he's coming too. So it's going to be, you know, that's going to be an incredible experience. And again, being on the other side, I get a chance to really appreciate artistry versus just trying to be in that number. I get a chance to sit back and say, oh, yes.
Right.
You know, so that's a really, really, you know, cool place to be.
Well, and also, I mean, listen, you know, the respect and admiration for you, and then you being in that ambassadorship type of, you know, role is even going to lend a big part of those artists coming, because, you know, they're going to do it. Yeah, it's a gig, but, you know, everybody doesn't always have to hit every market. So when you're involved, suddenly there's credibility and there's this whole thing of, oh yeah, we got, you know, it's Keys involved. We got to, you know what I'm saying? So
yeah, that's that love right there.
You know what I'm saying? People don't see these type of politics backstage. They don't understand that this stuff happens all the time. You know, so it's like, you know, when you look back, man, I mean, you started in St. Louis, from the guy that was in St. Louis, you know, to going to New York, doing what you did, ending up, you know, on the Miles movie and all these stages. I mean, when you were a kid, man, did you ever imagine it would be like this? Did you have a different image of what the career path would be when you were younger versus what it actually ended up being?
Man, absolutely. I mean, on one side, I always felt that I was going to go to high levels, but I just didn't know what the details would be. And every day, it's chiseled out something even more incredible, something even more visceral, and, you know, expectation and mind blown, even, you know, even today, over and over again. So growing up as a kid and, you know, Miles Davis being a hero, I never knew that I'd be on projects and in bands that would honor him and, you know, continue his legacy. In terms of, you know, Michael Jackson, going on the road with Greg Fillinganes and so many amazing people really celebrating, you know, the legacy of Michael Jackson. Again, being in the studio with Beyoncé, being in the studio with Jay-Z and Mac Miller, and working with D'Angelo, literally being the only musician on stage with D'Angelo, you know, on some of his final performances is, you know, I didn't have that on my bingo card. Again, having an incredible collective of amazing friends that, you know, we get together and create amazing stuff all the time, from Terrence Martin to Robert Glasper and Kamasi Washington, yourself, and projects that we have coming out really soon. You know, it's such an amazing ride. Again, from, you know, working with Elton John and so many other people you would never even imagine that this horn, you know, coming out of Ferguson would be touching the world, you know, over and over again. It's such a special thing, and I'm humbled by the idea that this is only ground zero, that we're going to go higher. So every day, that's what keeps me coming back, knowing that there's some dopeness waiting to be discovered, man.
Yeah, that is so amazing. And you're right. You know, it's only up from here and it's going to keep ascending. And, you know, you're giving so much to the culture, man, and the art form. Man, it's just amazing. You've become, you know, no pun intended, you've become the trumpet of the trumpet. You see what I'm saying? It's like you are the voice, you know, right now. Because, you know, every instrument kind of has their shifts, right? You know what I mean? We saw that shift happen with Robert on the piano. We saw that shift happen with Chris Dave and certain other drummers. You know, right now, for sure, your name is in everybody's mouth right now as the guy. It's like, and I'm seeing you everywhere. You know, we did that performance that we did together at the that
living
theater.
room.
The living room, and then we did that performance for the screening of that movie.
Oh, yes, amazing.
And with the orchestra, and I saw the reaction of everybody. You know, Miss Kim Burrell was there too. I saw the reaction, man, and it was like, people were just moved by what you were doing, man. And it's like, you know, you have that ability to really translate emotion on the trumpet. So, and through just your music in general, man. So that's amazing. So one thing I like to ask everyone on the show is, you know, and you play an instrument that's more of a voice instrument, so a lead instrument. So this is actually, I'm particularly interested in your response. What is your outlook on what's happening in music with AI? What do you think about that? Like, what's your vantage point on that? Because you produce too. So what's your vantage point on that?
I mean, at the end of the day, when we use things as tools, that's what they are. They're not the end all be all. They're not the final thought. They're just a part of the journey. You know, at one point, you know, there were no synthesizers in jazz. And then all of a sudden, they've been in jazz since what, the 50s.
Right.
You know,
yeah.
You know what I'm saying? At one point, there was no multi-track recording. You know, at one point, there were no Les Paul guitars. At one point, you know, there were no pickups, you know, but over time, we figured out ways to harness those things and use them for creativity, for the betterment of what music is.
Yeah.
The way I look at AI today is it's the same thing. I mean, you do have people who may misuse it or not know how to use it or know how to use it as a tool. But for cats who really know how to play, who really gone through the process and the discipline of learning learning an instrument, you use it as, oh, this might save me time, or this might help me get my vision across with less time or for lower budget. But it's still my idea. It's still my thought process. It still came from me. You know, I've used this as a not as a crutch, but as a way to elevate what's already here. And, you know, again, you know, there's so many different, you know, AI things happening, you know, in terms of music, also in terms of just our daily life. You know, when we talk about Claude and all of the open AI stuff, it's just like, sometimes it just makes things easier. It's not going to be me, but it will help my day go smoother, you know, in the studio, again, sometimes we don't have the budget that allow us to have, you know, 100-piece orchestra, but we need to make that 100-piece orchestra sound happen. So what are you going to do? Or you don't have enough time to, you know, to score something for a certain scenario, but you need it to happen yesterday. So what you going to do? You know, again, it's a different time in terms of budgets. It's a different time in terms of, you know, in terms of time, because we don't have it like that. So what do you got to do? You got to find a tool that'll allow you to get what it is that you need to get done. And I think AI is a viable component for that, but it's not everything. It is not the vision. It's just a part of the vision.
Yeah. And it's definitely not, you know, something that anybody I know or anybody that comes on this show would advocate as far as plagiarism and all that. You know, people look at it on one side. Yeah, it's like we're looking at it as a tool. All that negative stuff, it doesn't even cross anybody's mind that's a real creative, because you're not you got your own ideas. You're just using it to enhance stuff and to help the output. I think that word output, I know there's a company called that, but that word is very important now because of the lack of time, like you said. And now it costs more money to get to a place. I mean, everything has its connection. You know, by some metrics, you know, there's a whole population that's in a recession right now that nobody's talking about, which is the Black community. Black America right now on paper is in recession, but nobody's talking about it. So, you know, anything to enhance what we do, you know what I'm saying? It's like, that's an important thing. So I'm glad you shared that with us, man, and got your take on it. Because I really like to get everybody's, you know, energy on how they look at AI. So before we get out of here, man, any kind of, anything you got going on or coming out that you want to speak on, man, you know, before we get out of here?
I have a few shows coming up. Not exactly sure when this is going to air, but you know, a few shows coming up at the Blue Note. With you, which is excited. You know, on the 13th of June. That's going to be fun. And that's in association with the Blue Note Jazz Festival. That's on the 13th. What else? on the 11th, my first premiere, I say my first Tribeca premiere of a full length film that I scored. I did the music for the Locks trilogy film. So
Wow.
Jadakiss and Styles P, and Chic. I did I did the score for Mass Appeal. So that's going to premiere on the 11th in New York City. I'm excited about that. Working on a new albums at the moment. I don't know when they're going to drop.
Right.
But new music is coming. Foreverland was amazing and has had a great run, but it's time for the new.
Yeah.
Again, a couple of, I'm touring with the Miles Davis Electric Band. Some other things are happening as well that I can't really say. But dopeness is upon us. So we're working. We're working, man.
So speaking of that, I didn't get into that. I wanted to get into that. The Miles Davis Electric Band. What is that? Tell me what that is and what that comprises of. Because you may or may not know. I mean, I run in events almost every day at my coffee place. That's my guy. So
love it.
Yeah. So what's that band about, and what do you guys been doing?
Man, the Miles Davis Electric Band, basically celebrating the music of Miles Davis from the late 70s all the way up until he passed away. An incredible array of musicians. Vince Wilburn, who's leading us and is playing drums, the nephew of Miles Davis. On bass, the great Daryl Jones. Munch, yes sir, the one and only, from the Rolling Stones to Miles Davis to Madonna to everybody else. The one and only. As well as Nyong'o Jackson. And who else is on that? Antoine Roney, the brother of Miles. I said the brother of Miles. Sorry, the brother of Wallace Roney.
Yeah.
And Bobby, an amazing musician, and Greg, who's running the recording club right now.
Got you.
Yeah. So
Spiro.
it's Greg Spiro, an amazing musician. So it's such a great vibe, and it's jamming, and it's not. It's the different output of the Miles Davis stuff. We're so used to the Conda Blue era. We're so used to the 60s, but nobody really hints on that later stuff. So it's a dope array. And I've been playing in that band for some years now. But this year, since we're celebrating 100 years of Miles Davis, we're playing a lot.
Nice, man. Well, that's beautiful. Yeah, I'm going to have to try to catch that when I can, because that's an incredible lineup. And just for those of the people that don't know, Miles died doing hip hop. Let's not forget the progressiveness of that. Doo-Bop was his last album with Easy Mo B, and that was straight boom bapping, and that was hip hop. So, that mentality of pushing, people should not get stuck in one thing, because sometimes I'm a this kind of guy or I'm a this kind of guy. That keeps you, it kind of keeps you in a
box.
Yeah.
Yes, indeed.
And you are one of those shining examples of what happens when you go outside the box. You don't want to, people want to pigeonhole you and put you in this corner. I just feel like that doesn't serve the music. That doesn't help the music progress. All it does is keep you kind of, separated and segregated. You know what I'm saying? We talk about segregation. It's still a lot of segregation going on in music, and it's unfortunate. You know what I mean?
Yes, I look at it as, I am music. I'm not a jazz musician. I'm not a hip hop artist. I'm not a gospel musician. I'm music, and all that that entails, the good parts of music. You know what I'm saying? I'm all of those things, and I aspire to be deeper into what that is, no matter who it is. If somebody's dope and they doing country music or doing bluegrass, violin or fiddle, I'm down for all of that. I'm down for all of the smoke of whatever somebody has to add to the canon of dope music. I want to be a part of that. Sign me up for that. It don't matter what the genre is, because again, at the end of the day, we are the soundtrack to people's lives. And, culturally, we have a lot of power. We have a lot of weight, and we can use, what's inside of here to translate outward, that can actually help change people's, mindset, which is what we need to contribute to the betterment of this world. Unfortunately, there's a lot of shit going on, but we have the ability to use music as a salve to make this place better, man, or at least give people another outlook. You know?
Yeah, real talk, man. Well, Keyon, man, I really appreciate you coming, bro. And
man, it's a pleasure, man. First of all, I got to give you your kudos. Man, Trevor Lawrence, just one of the best that we've ever seen in terms of music production, in terms of musicianship and professionalism. There is nothing higher than what you've left us with, bro. And I appreciate you being my friend and my brother, and always being a shining light to what's to come and what it should be, man. We appreciate you, bro.
That, man. Well, thank you, man. I appreciate that, man. And thank you for stopping by. Ladies and gentlemen, the incredible Mr. Keyon Harrold.
Man.
St. Louis home.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. My brother. Thank you, man.
All good. We're going to do it again, man. And I look forward to playing with you. By the time the interviews come out, the gig will be over, but I already know we will have had a great time.
Yes, indeed. It's happening. Yeah. We in the future already.
Exactly. All right, bro. Well, I'll talk to you soon, man.
All right, my bro. Have a great one.
You too.
Take care.
Okay, everybody. Appreciate you for rocking with us today. Share this episode with somebody in your circle who's on their musical journey. You never know who needs to hear this conversation. Like, comment, and subscribe. And also follow us on Instagram at Trevor Lawrence Jr. and stay locked in. I'm Trevor Lawrence Jr. It's the TrevBeats Show, and we out.
It's the TrevBeats Show. It's your TrevBeats Show.
It's the TrevBeats Show, and we out. We out. It's the TrevBeats